Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, BCC members, business partners, colleagues, and friends. Let me welcome you to the Green Growth Online Conference, Unlocking Business Opportunities in a Zero Carbon Economy. My name is Sylvia Bušňáková. I'm a Deputy Director of the British Chamber of Commerce, and on behalf of the Chamber, let me express our sincere gratitude to the British Embassy in Prague for generously supporting the conference and for their great help to organize it. I would like to thank to all of our speakers and moderators for taking time out for their busy schedule. We owe you a very special vote of thanks for being here and for sharing your experiences, know-how, and thoughts. We hope that the conference will be a great success. So many people have contributed in so many ways to turn this event into a smoothly running meeting with many very interesting presentations and posters and a very good atmosphere for discussion and networking. At 1:20 p.m., we will start with plenary sessions panels. There'll be a break or networking at approximately 3:15, and at 3:25 p.m., parallel panels will start. You can choose which one you want to enter. At approximately 4:30 p.m., the conference will end by the moderator of the concrete panel. I would like to thank to all of our partners of the conference, Albion Cars, Penta, and Vodafone. And please do not miss the opportunity to enter their attractive presentations of new projects in our MIA virtual space. Ladies and gentlemen, now let me welcome the British Ambassador to the Czech Republic, Nick Archer, who is honoring with us and his presence. Your Excellency, the virtual floor is yours.
Sylvia, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to everybody who's here. As always on these occasions, one has to make a bit of effort of the imagination, but I've seen the guest list and it's a long one, and that in itself is hugely encouraging. I wanted to take this opportunity less to give you the standard British government upcoming COP26 spiel, and more to reflect a little bit on the particular theme here of green growth and why I think it's so terribly important that we really talk incessantly about this from now, and actually we began a while ago, through to the Glasgow COP in November of this year and beyond. One of the things that the embassy was able to help the chamber with was providing one of your guest speakers this afternoon, my colleague John Merton, who's the British government's COP26 envoy, and he's the great expert, and he will set out that context in his usual expert way. But I wanted to try and make the link between that very high level and global ambition of the British government, which is to have a COP which really transforms the global effort towards low carbon, green growth, zero emissions, and what I experience in this country as British ambassador. So because making a success of the COP is our top diplomatic priority this year, I've spent quite a number of months now trying to work out why this country is where it is, which I would categorize as kind of somewhere in the middle of the European Union pack, and how it is that the Czech Republic isn't at the front of the European Union pack, where personally I think it can and should be. And in order to understand the situation here, I've spent those months stakeholder mapping, amongst other things. That's to say, I've been out talking to people, trying to find out where the reticence about green renewal is coming from. And I have to say, on the positive side, I think we are seeing things moving here. That's a first positive. So when the European Commission last year was first floating targets for the European Union, there was a degree of suspicion and negativity here. And now in March 2021, there seems to be a much higher degree of comfort. But what I don't see, and I'm being perfectly honest, is a sense that this is an opportunity to be seized. What I hear about more often is a set of targets, a set of ambitions which still feel a bit alien and still feel a bit imposed. And I think that success for us today would be about us all resolving to get out in the middle of this afternoon and try even harder to change that mindset. Because as you will discuss, and as I am sure you will conclude, there is a huge opportunity here for Czech business, which God knows is, you have such talent, such capability, a tradition of well over a century of making things in the most modern way and adding value up to the highest possible point, that actually the sorts of challenges that the low carbon transformation presents seem to me as an outsider and as an observer almost tailor-made for this country. Now, recently, we've been going around from the embassy talking about coal phase out because we're conscious that there's still an unresolved debate in this country about whether to leave it until 2038, a frankly very late date, but a date for which your German neighbours have given you cover, or whether to pull it forward. The sort of orthodox, most talked about alternative to 38, as you all know, is 33. But I'm entirely confident that over the next decade, even 33 will seem a bit slow and will also represent, in a decade's time, a missed opportunity. When we talk to all these stakeholders whom we're mapping about why is it that people are clinging so stubbornly to 38, I'm very often told that it's Czech industry that doesn't like the challenge of an earlier date. But actually, when I talk to the people I know in Czech industry, I find it quite hard to identify the laggards and the conservatives. I know, we all know, of course, that the pandemic has created colossal challenges for very many of our companies. And one of those challenges is that it's filled a lot of the headspace that might otherwise be available to company boards, company directors, to think through and more fully grasp the low carbon opportunity. But I don't think it's that alone. Similarly, we know that anything that somebody else tells you to do, rather than you thinking of yourself, is something which tends to be less appealing. And similarly, of course, we know that there are real practical challenges. But when I talk to businesses here who are at the forefront, who are looking at renewables, who are generating electricity and so on and so forth, what I hear is that all the logic points to this country seizing the opportunity. So, to conclude, he said, looking at his clock, I hope that today's event is a catalytic event, that it enables us to find new strategies, new arguments, and new enthusiasm with which to help push this country over the tipping point to the place in which, in logic, it should be. And reverting to where I began, the British government's ambition, I hope and believe that with an industrial sector, with a business sector that gets the opportunity the Czech Republic will be one of a whole number of countries that turns up to Glasgow in November, not fearing yet again that something's going to be done to it, but hoping that the leaders of pretty much all the nations in the world in Glasgow will create the context in which that bet on a very smart, a very technologically sophisticated, low carbon future for this country will feel like the right bet to make. My last thought is this. As John and others have heard me say before, the reason I speak passionately and personally about this is because I was the British ambassador in Copenhagen when COP15 took place. And the numbers are confusing, not very enlightening, but COP15 was the one at which, amongst others, our then Prime Minister Gordon Brown and the then American President Barack Obama really thought that they could effect the transformation. They really believed that that was the moment at which fundamental change would come. And it didn't. But the reason was very evident, and we have learnt the lesson. We did a magnificent job of persuading the world's leaders to turn up, but we did a very poor job of educating them before they turned up. And when I say them, I mean them, their societies, and critically for this occasion, their business sectors. So they turned up to listen, they turned up to discuss, but they did not turn up to commit. And that's why it's taken so long. I mean, God knows this is ancient history now. It's taken so long to get back to the place at which we hoped we would be in Copenhagen in 2009. But our ambition, as John will tell you in much greater detail and with much greater authority, is not only to get back to 2009, but to get well beyond, to build on Paris and to form a consensus around how promising for everybody, for businesses, for shareholders, for employees, for owners, and for the environments in the broadest sense in which they live, a good deal at Glasgow would be. Thank you very much for listening.
Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, once again, I'd like to welcome another speaker of the conference, and that is Petr Carrell. As you know, Petr is a vice chairman of the board of the British Chamber of Commerce, and he's also a managing director of company London Market, concentrating on services in the areas of expert and structured finance. Petr, welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, all British members, I'm very happy to welcome you here on the Green Growth Sustainability Conference on behalf of our chamber, British Chamber of Commerce in Prague. When we were putting this conference together, we were not sure whether people will not be tired of all the online meetings and conferences and Zooms, but the reality proved to be the opposite. And today we have got over 250 registered participants from all around the world and from countries as far away as Australia. So welcome all. Now, COVID pandemic has changed our lives a big way, and in a way that no one could imagine some 12 months ago, and made our professional and personal lives much more challenging and less amusing, often without possibility for direct interactions. Many of us are still in lockdown, working from home. So it's same with me. So if you hear the doorbell or dog or kids fighting over internet, I'm sure you'll sympathize. But despite all the difficulties, we should not forget about the key global challenge we are all facing, and that's maintaining sustainable environment and business for future generations. There are many reasons that drive global initiatives. It's obviously environment, climate, nature protection, but it's also strong economic and business drivers. And because British Chamber is a commercial organization, we want to showcase that the climate business is now a regular and profitable part of business universe, and not just an agenda for environmental activists or scientists. Simply, the sustainable business can be and is profitable business model. And that's why British Chamber here in Prague, together with the British Embassy and in cooperation with the UK government, have agreed to organize this Green Growth online conference as one of the pre-Glasgow summit events. And the aim of this conference is to support cross-sector, cross-disciplinary discussions on climate change and climate solutions among business, government representatives, scientists, and academia. Our esteemed speakers include representatives of national governments, multilateral organizations, business, lawyers, academics, bankers, the mix that is needed to put together a strong, sustainable business strategy. British Chamber of Commerce is proud to support the sustainable and green growth initiatives, and when we plan to organize more events relating to these topics in the coming future. Finally, I would like to express our gratitude and deep thanks to all speakers that agreed to join us and share their experience. Without further ado, I think we can now move on to our first panel.
Thank you, Pete, for this invitation. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Excellent. Now, Anub, before we start, I'll just do a little introduction of the topic and of the speakers, if that's fine with you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, good afternoon to everyone again. In our first panel, we will be covering the role of governments and multilateral organizations in supporting the sustainable green development. And in the beginning, let me apologize our Deputy Minister Jirotkova, who to participate in this panel, but fell sick and she couldn't attend. So I hope she would recover soon. So on this first panel, we'll have two experts. First is John Merton, who is UK Envoy for Glasgow Climate Summit, and he'll be covering the British position and approach towards sustainability, obviously within the light of the Climate Glasgow Conference. And as a second speaker, we have Anub Chagwani, who's Global Head of Climate Finance and Policy at the IFC, part of the World Bank Organization, who will provide his views. Before we get into the panel, I have just picked a few pieces of data to set the scene. The data are a bit alarming, but that's why we're here to discuss and take potential actions. So first one is temperature. Year 2020 was the hottest year ever on the planet since the measurement started. And the average temperature from 2000 is 1.5 Celsius above the last century average. So we're above 1.5 Celsius. Arctic ice, that's very interesting stuff because it's at its lower levels of a new ice ever. And the warming is taking twice the space of the planet. And this piece of ice is absorbing a great amount of carbon dioxide and allows great reflection of the heat back to the atmosphere. The permafrost thing, i.e. the ever-frozen land, which is some 25 million square kilometers covering Greenland, Siberia, Canada, Scandinavians, and it holds twice as much of carbon dioxide than the entire atmosphere. And it entails also methane, not just carbon dioxide. And methane is much more dangerous for the atmosphere. But we are witnessing massive thawing of the permafrost, thus representing big danger for the atmosphere and climate. Another point is about forest and deforestation. Forest is the most efficient carbon sink on the planet. It holds about 45% of the planet's carbon and stored in trees and forest soil. And since 1990, about 200 million hectares disappeared. It's sort of difficult to imagine, but it's probably something like Spain, France, Italy, and UK together. And yet, annually, there's over 10 million of hectares that disappear. So this is approximately the territory of the Czech Republic. The trend is slowing, but still alarming. And finally, the topic of carbon dioxide emissions that I'm sure will be covered by many. Again, if we look into history, in 1950s, the humankind produced about 5 billion tons. In 2000, we were at 20 billion tons. And last year, we are at 35 billion tons of carbon dioxide that is emitted to atmosphere. That represents 420 particles per million. It's a strange number, but it is how it is measured. And this is what happened on the Earth 4 million years ago, when the temperatures were 2 to 4 Celsius warmer, and sea levels were between 15 to 25 meters higher, which means most of the Netherlands, Denmark, some of the Germany lowlands, and UK coastals would be flooded. So these are the data, and these are the issues that we need to cover, and I'm sure our speakers will have views and will cover some of the points mentioned above. And our first speaker is actually Dr. John Merton, who is the UK government's COP26 envoy, and in his career, he held a number of diplomatic posts as ambassador to Democratic Republic of Congo, deputy high commissioner in Nairobi, high commissioner to Mauritius, and ambassador to Madagascar. And within the Foreign Office, he was also responsible for the department that is dealing with the UK relations with East and South Asia and Australasia. So, John, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petr. And sorry to have just switched my camera off. I just had to give a COVID test through the window because I'm off to Kenya tomorrow, and they need to have a COVID test delivered before I can fly. So thanks for bearing with me. Well, thank you to you and to Nick for setting the scene so well. Excuse me, sorry, the gentleman has just come to the door to collect the. Sorry, I'm just going to have to deal with this courier who's got a COVID test. Just excuse me 1 minute. Sorry.
No problem. That's the real life.
Thank you. Sorry about that. The joys of working from home. We're all learning as we do this together. Well, Sam, thank you for setting the scene so carefully. You and Nick. As you say, I'm coordinating our diplomatic effort ahead of COP26, and where we have a task ahead of us, which is quite different than the task that Nick and colleagues faced in Copenhagen in 2015, or that our colleagues in Paris faced in 2015, or in Copenhagen in 2010, because we do not have to agree a global agreement on climate change. That was done in Paris. They tried in Copenhagen, they failed, an agreement was reached in Paris. So our job is not to reach an agreement. Our job is to make the agreement that was made in Paris work. And the Paris Agreement on climate change, which I'm sure many people are familiar with, is hugely strong because it's universal. Previous agreements on climate change had been limited only to the industrialized economies. And the Paris Agreement is strong precisely because every country in the world, from the richest to the poorest, committed to taking climate action. But where Paris is untested is the mechanisms of making it work. It's universal, but it's dependent on voluntary action. And every country has to come forward with nationally determined contributions, setting out the level of climate ambition that they want to take, the amount of emissions reductions they want to achieve. And as is sort of contained in the name, nationally determined, those are for sovereign governments to decide. They're not negotiated. We can exert peer pressure, but they're for governments to decide. And so it's an untested hypothesis that this Paris Agreement of voluntary action can work. And we have to demonstrate at Glasgow that it can. And we want to do that through pursuing 4 goals. Firstly is to get the emissions reductions commitments out of countries to demonstrate that we're on this path to a zero carbon world. And we want all countries to come forward with net zero targets and a date by which they will take their economy to net zero emissions. Not absolute zero, there will still be sectors of our economies that produce greenhouse gases, but net zero, because those remaining gases that are produced in certain sectors will be offset by things like carbon capture and storage, or storage in nature. We want those net zero targets to be accompanied by shorter term emissions reductions plans. If any of you have got teenage daughters like I have, you know, if I say that I'm going to do something in 2050, she'll roll her eyes and say, that's too far away. What are you going to do tomorrow to save the world, Dad? And so what we are encouraging countries to do as well is to come forward with new and more ambitious NDCs to the ones that they came forward with at Paris, setting out how they will reduce their emissions. And the EU has committed to a 55% reduction of emissions by 1990 levels by 2030. The UK has committed to a 68% reduction in emissions on 1990 levels by 2030. And we're encouraging other countries to come forward and match us in that ambition. The second thing we need to do at Glasgow is demonstrate that we are helping countries who are vulnerable to climate change to adapt and be resilient. Petr, you cited the increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that means that actually we have already undergone more than 1 degree centigrade of anthropogenically induced global warming since the Industrial Revolution. And some of the effects might be slow to be felt in countries like the Czech Republic and the UK, although they're there. But some of the effects are already being felt very acutely in some of the more vulnerable countries of the world, particularly low-lying and small island developing states. And we need to show that we are helping, as a global community, those countries adapt and be more resilient in the face of climate change. The third area where we need to make progress is in finance. Now, partly that's the financial promises that we made in Copenhagen and again at Paris for the rich industrialized economies of the world to support those poorer economies of the world to make emissions reductions. But increasingly, it's about not just mobilizing the 100 billion a year of climate finance that donor countries promised at Paris, but mobilizing the trillions of dollars of investments around the world to put into the low carbon economy. You mentioned you had an Australian participant on this call. I was on a virtual visit to Australia this morning, and I was speaking to someone in the finance ministry in the Australian government who said Australian pension schemes have over $3 trillion of assets. and the size of the Australian economy is $2 trillion. And pension schemes, above all investors, value long-term certainty and are very alert to the risks that climate change can impact upon their investments in a negative way. And so the finance ministry in Australia is working out how can we help companies and pension fund managers in Australia take account of climate change in their investment decision making. In the UK, we've come up with a solution to that, which is we want all companies in the UK to issue data in line with the Task Force for Carbon-Related Financial Disclosures by 2023. Now, if I take the jargon away, what that means is by 2023, all listed companies in the UK will have to disclose, according to certain standards, the impact of their business upon the environment and the impact of climate change in the future upon their business. And that will help investors like pension fund managers and others take decisions and invest in those companies that stand to prosper the most in a world affected by climate change, and to invest also in those companies that are coming up with solutions to the problems of climate change. And finally, the fourth thing we need to do at Glasgow is to promote international collaboration, because we can see, and I'll speak in a moment about how the world is already moving quite quickly on a trajectory towards a low carbon economy, opening up all the sort of growth opportunities that Nick was speaking about at the beginning. And so that's really encouraging, but it's not moving fast enough to deliver the climate goals that we set ourselves at Paris. At Paris, we all agreed that we would try to limit the rise in global temperatures to no more than 2 degrees centigrade. And the current predictions based on current country plans are that we will achieve a limitation of climate change to around 4 degrees centigrade. And the difference in impacts that are felt between a 2 degrees centigrade rise and a 4 degrees centigrade rise in temperature are enormous in terms of sea level rise, in terms of extreme weather events, in terms of the cost of climate change upon our economy. So we need to accelerate the transition towards a low carbon economy and talk a little bit about how we do that. In sum, what we've got to demonstrate is that the world is on an accelerating transition to a low carbon economy, and to get, as Nick was highlighting earlier, a shift in mentality so that businesses see climate action and governments see climate action not as a sort of painful but necessary trip to the dentist that we know is good for us in the long run but will be completely unpleasant in the short term, but rather as a huge opportunity that we need to seize. And Nick will bear testimony to the fact that we have a huge advantage over our diplomatic predecessors who were negotiating back in Copenhagen, because 10 years ago, if you were asking a country to reduce its emissions, you were asking it to trade away a little bit of economic growth in order to achieve emissions reduction on the other hand. Now, there was a strong argument for that, even back then in 2010. We've known in the UK since the Stern report in 2006 that at a society level, it was cheaper to tackle climate change and stop climate change emerging than to deal with the consequences of climate change. But that was at a society level in a framework where there were many market failures, and the job of government was to try and regulate those market failures so that that society benefit could be realized. But that was always going to be a difficult job for policymakers. But what's changed since 2010 in Copenhagen is that not only now at a society level is it economic to tackle climate change, but also at a selfish individual economic actor level. So whether you're an individual buying a car or whether you're a company making an investment, it's now absolutely in your interests to invest in a low carbon technology future. Since 2010, for example, the cost of solar power has fallen by 85%. And so policies that might not have been appropriate 10 years ago for solar power are now absolutely appropriate. And in the United Arab Emirates, for example, they're now producing solar power at 1.6 US cents per kilowatt hour. And to compare that to a market that many of you will be familiar with, in the United States of America, the cost of transmission of electricity along a cable is about 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So we're already seeing that in some parts of the world now, they're able to produce power more cheaply on rooftops than the electricity company could send it from a coal-fired power station down a wire to your house, which means that, that the economics of climate action are changing very fundamentally. And many of you in industry and in commerce will be familiar with the concept of S-curves of adoption. And something that doesn't look like it's taking up a very large share of the market can suddenly explode onto the market in no time at all, far faster than perhaps people outside of that area would have anticipated. The famous example is back in the 1980s, AT&T, the American telecoms company, asked McKinsey's management consultants how many mobile phone subscribers there would be in the United States by the year 2000. And McKinsey's management consultants went away and did their sums, and they came back with a figure that in historical perspective was shown to be 120 times too small. They were off by a factor of 120. And as a result of that failure to anticipate the growth of mobile phones, AT&T invested in more fixed line technology, and of course was overtaken, as history shown, by the mobile phone operators. And we mustn't make the same mistake again with fossil fuels and with other forms of low carbon technology. Hydrocarbon generation, fossil fuel generation, has dominated our economy for most of the 20th century. In the UK, in 1990, coal production accounted for 70% of our electricity generation. And even 9 years ago, in 2012, coal production accounted for 39% of our electricity generation. Last year, coal production was less than 2% of our electricity generation, and we'll phase it out in the UK altogether by 2024. And in many markets now, in nearly all the markets of the world, Bloomberg Energy and other economic researchers have shown that fossil fuels have been undercut by photovoltaics. But what we're increasingly seeing in many emerging markets like India is that the cost of investing in new photovoltaics will, within 2 or 3 years, be cheaper than the ongoing marginal cost of running a fossil fuel power station. That is to say, if your uncle gave you a coal-fired power station for your birthday and it had all been paid off, simply the cost of buying the coal into that power station, putting it in the furnace and taking the ashes away again and generating power would be more than the cost of the interest payments you'd pay on a new photovoltaic power station. So in those environments, the economics of fossil fuels will be undercut far quicker than many analysts previously estimated. So at COP26, what we want to try and do is narrate this story so that we can help policymakers consider the implications for their own economies. Figures like Greta Thunberg have a lot of traction in many Northwest European markets, but if I go to East Asia and I talk about Greta Thunberg and her message, it doesn't penetrate in quite the same way. But if I go to policymakers in, say, Japan or Korea, and I say, you're paying 9 or 12 US cents for your energy, how will you compete with energy intensive industries in India, where they've got a commitment to put in 450 gigawatts of solar power by 2030 and are doing so at less than 3 US cents per kilowatt hour? How will you compete with companies in India who have energy for a third of the cost that you do? That really begins to have some traction and affects policymakers' minds. So we want to narrate that story of the evolving economics of climate change. And we also want to bring together industry to try and unblock some of the barriers that remain to fast adoption. Part of that is regulation. And many of you will have followed in the UK. We've recently announced, for example, a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel engines by 2030 in the UK. So you won't be able to buy a diesel or petrol car in the UK after 2030 from a showroom. And bringing together markets, key markets to set standards like that to speed the transition in industry. And some of it will involve bringing together companies and governments together to look at some of the technical barriers that need to be overcome together in order to speed the transition to a low carbon economy. So that's our job ahead of COP26. I'm very happy to take questions, because one of the problems with these webinars is I can't see my audience. I can't see whether they're falling asleep. I can't see whether they're listening and following. And I don't know kind of the level of knowledge of people I'm speaking to. So I don't want to speak at length, but I'm very happy to take questions about that afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John. We'll do the Q&A session at the end, if you're still around. I know you have to leave at some point of time. Now, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Anub Chagwani, who's a global head of climate finance and policy at the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank, but it's the biggest development institution focusing on the private sector. The IFC, the private sector, World Bank is more the government and public sector. And in his current role, Anub oversees the IFC work on green bond standards, carbon pricing, climate risk and adaptation, and green development. So with that, Anub, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you to the British Chamber of Commerce for inviting IFC to be part of this. I'm happy to build on what Ambassador Archer and John talked about, and Peter, you referred to as well. I mean, I couldn't agree more with what both Ambassador Archer and John had laid out in terms of the opportunity. Number one thing, the opportunity that we have at the moment. And what I want to talk about as we get into this is how we've seized on that opportunity, what opportunity there is, and more concretely, a couple of examples of that opportunity that we've seen. So, as Peter said, you know, we can move to the next slide. We are part of the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and if you see the areas, the key themes. So what we as the World Bank did, as we are the largest source of financing in the developing markets for climate finance. And it's been average of 28% of our business in the last several years. And now with more ambitious targets, we're moving to 35%. And then we're looking also to help build resilience. So essentially what we do is work with our emerging market counterpart countries and help them build plans and meet the Paris Agreement goals by implementing the NDCs. And that's where finance plays a significant role, but so does capacity building and training and approaches that we can leverage from one market to another. So there have been a few key themes in our business: clean energy, climate smart cities, green building, green finance, and climate smart agribusiness. If we were to put all the and the numbers, just to give you an example, in the last 15 years, we've done about 28 billion in long-term finance as IFC alone. So this is money going from IFC to private sector companies in the emerging markets for climate-friendly businesses. So that's what is green finance. And we mobilized an additional 22 billion from other sources for the same business. So in about $50 billion that we've provided for climate smart businesses. And these are the number of sectors that I talk about. And this is not even touching the World Bank side, because when we look at this space, we see an opportunity. And we joke many times, my ex-boss used to say this: we're not the climate change department, we're the climate business department, which is what I am part of, the climate business department. And so our goal is to enable climate business and finance climate business. Let me take a few examples about climate business and how we've been able to grow it. So one is, of course, through climate policy that we've come out. When we saw the NDC commitments and we said, what is that opportunity? We came to a number at that point in time of about 23 trillion in climate smart opportunities until 2030. So here's, if you were to make the buildings greener, if you were to clean energy or climate smart agribusiness, you had opportunity of 23 trillion in climate smart investments until 2030. And I'm sure that number has gone up significantly. Since this was a study done a few years ago. And then on average, an investment of $1 yields $4 in benefits. So a little bit talking to what Morten was talking about, John was talking about in terms of the Stern study. What does it give you? And here we are saying, and the UK is a fantastic example of how it's, for example, grown the offshore wind business, which has a way renewable energy can be and the range of renewable energy that can be extended. And so I'm going to take the example of green buildings. For example, the way IFC was able to scale green buildings was by setting a standard. So we went out and we developed this program called EDGE, which was in response to the need for a measurable and credible solution to prove the business case for green buildings. And last year we came out with a report that said just that and helped emerging market countries to actually quantify, as well as go as how to invest in a green building. What are the returns? What can you expect? And so this tool essentially gave developers, it's a software tool, financiers, an angle into green buildings. They go in and they can see what constitutes as green. And in, for example, in December, using that framework, the Pro Credit Bank, the Bulgaria head office, became the third EDGE certified zero carbon building in the world, which again, the standard helped to say, how do you get to those efficiency standards by use of materials, energy saved, water use saved, and creating that standard has allowed IFC to finance more than $5 billion in just green buildings alone in the emerging market context, to the numbers I was referring to. John touched on solar, and you know, solar is one of those technologies in the S curve, I think, where the cost has come down significantly in the last few years. And when we developed a program together with our sister institution, the World Bank side, called Scaling Solar. And so what we would do, if we do now, is go to emerging market countries and say, hey, here's the whole set of package, the public sector side, the regulatory aspect, strengthening government, as well as the private sector, the set of documents that are needed, privatizing power generation and bringing in investments into solar. And we've been able to significantly scale solar in many of these markets. John referred to India. India alone, we've financed 5 gigawatts of solar projects, some very high-profile ones as well. Recently, as part of the Scaling Solar program, Uzbekistan became the first country outside Sub-Saharan Africa where we started with Zambia, and there you can imagine the cost of power was 2.7 cents per kilowatt hour. To John's point about how the costs are coming down in this space. But finally, the third one I want to touch on is transportation, and I don't talk about in these examples. We can move to the next slide as well. From there, so these are the areas that I talked about. In transportation, what we've done is helped enable green transport through electric vehicles and EVs. And again, John touched upon this about the banning the fossil fuel, sale of fossil fuel cars. EVs are becoming more cost competitive on their own. Before they needed incentives, just like solar needed incentives before. EVs needed incentives. Today, they're coming of age and the cost curve is coming down. Many of you know that the battery cost itself is about 30% of the cost of the car. And as that cost of the battery comes down, the cost is becoming cheaper. But it's the infrastructure around it that needs to be developed as well. Charging stations appropriately, and batteries supply. So what we've been doing is we've been working with cities in some instances on helping them design their urban transit systems, to think differently about those systems. And an example, recently we partnered with Ukraine's leading retail distributor of transportation fuels, Anub Chagwani, that basically we helped them shift their fleet to electric vehicles. And in doing that, they was able to save significant amounts of GHG emissions. So I wanted to use these examples, and I could talk to many more, to indicate where we've seen a business opportunity. We've tapped on that business opportunity. Our goal is to significantly increase that business opportunity, make people aware of that business opportunity, and finance that opportunity from IFC's own funding and through mobilization. So, Peter, let me stop there and see if there's a discussion people want to have around this.
Excellent. Thank you, Anup and John. There's a couple of questions that are here. I would also like to remind the audience, you can ask questions on the special application that was provided to you. So I have got a few questions, and I would start with John, if I may. And the question is, where do you think that the Czech Republic and UK and the EU perhaps could cooperate in the areas of, you know, clean energy, green growth, sustainability? Do you see any particular areas?
Thanks. Well, hopefully it'll be the UK, Czech Republic, and the EU. Although we've left the European Union, we're still great friends with all our European cousins and want to work closely with you. And we share hugely common goals in this space. So there are so many areas where we can work together. And I think just looking at the headlines about vaccine production at the moment just is a good example of how dispersed production of goods and services are in the world at the moment, and the automotive sector, for example, is no exception. If you look at automotive supply chains, they span across the UK and the European Union. So looking at how we can set common standards for zero emission vehicles and zero emission vehicle internal combustion engine phase out dates will be important, so that manufacturers have a lot of confidence. I think if we can't agree those sorts of phase out dates, you'll see what will happen, I think, inevitably, is that manufacturers will move at the speed of the fastest. And we're seeing that already. You know, it was only a year ago that General Motors were opposing new clean air legislation in the USA and new standards on automotives in the USA. In the last month, GM have committed to phase out the production of internal combustion engines globally by 2035. And obviously they're doing that for a reason. They think it's in their commercial interest. So that's one area where we should be working together. The transition to renewable energy is absolutely another. As we put more and more renewables into the UK grid, we are also increasing the number of interconnectors with our neighbours, whether that's Norway, whether that's European Union countries like Belgium or the Netherlands or France or our Irish cousins, because the nature of renewables and distributed generation means that obviously you have variability that needs to be managed. And so the more wide the grid that you have and the more interconnectors you have with your neighbours, the more you can balance that variability and one day be an exporter of energy and the next day be an importer of energy as the wind moves and as weather changes. So those are all hugely important areas. I think we should be looking together in terms of implementing common standards with respect to carbon-related financial disclosures, which is industry jargon for essentially standards by which companies can disclose the impact of their business on the environment and the impact of climate change policies on their business, so that investors have common information that they can use to make decisions. And we should also be coordinating in our diplomacy overseas, because the UK has one of the world's largest diplomatic networks, but you've got huge diplomatic networks across the European Union, like the French and the Germans, who have reach perhaps into countries that we may not have such strong reach, but we share common goals in terms of climate change. So working together internationally to persuade some of the other large emitters to take concrete steps to reduce their emissions will be an important part of our preparations ahead of COP26.
Peter, you're on mute.
Second question for you, John, that arrived is actually about the US participation in the climate talks and climate action. Do you think that with the new president and new ethos of the United States towards the climate, there will be a better achievements in Glasgow and more and quicker can be achieved?
Yeah, I'm confident that that's the case. President Joe Biden has committed the US to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, putting it on the same terms as the European Union, the UK, and major economies like Japan and Korea. And he's also pledged that he will bring carbon neutrality to the US electricity generation system by 2035, which is quite an ambitious target. So that's got to be hugely positive, because the US remains the world's second largest emitter, and depending on which measure you use, the world's largest market. So if that market for goods and services is pointing in a low carbon direction, that has to be good for all businesses that are joined at this webinar who are looking to invest in the low carbon economy, because you know that there's going to be a huge market for your products in the USA. I would just add, though, that of course the US had been actually moving in that direction anyway. If you look at the statistics, coal use in the USA fell faster under President Trump than it fell under President Obama. And that's not because of federal policy. That's simply because US electricity generating companies had worked out that it was in their interests to switch from coal to cheaper fossil fuel, to cheaper renewable energy. And if you look in places like Texas, new installations of renewable energy in Texas are overtaking installations of coal and oil and gas. So even in sort of traditionally hydrocarbon focused states within the United States of America, the transition to renewable energy had begun, which is why now the most valuable energy company in the world, and indeed obviously in the US, but also in the world, is no longer Exxon or Chevron, but NextEra Energy, which is a renewable energy producer based in Florida. So it's just an indication of the direction of travel and more we can expect.
Thank you. Now, there's a few questions here for Anub. Now, given the World Bank and IFC are the sort of the biggest investors into renewable and climate projects, would there be a practical guide for, let's say, a SME or large SME, how to approach IFC and ask for their support in climate projects?
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I mean, there is a practical guidance on the website, how to work with us. If you type that in, and it's available on the website, how to work with IFC. We're happy to connect, or you can connect on my email, and I'm happy to direct you to the right person if it's not me.
And from your experience, because often it is the case that smaller companies or sort of startup projects have difficulties reaching money, although they could be very good projects. And the big institutions such as EBRD or maybe a World Bank or other multilaterals haven't got enough or cannot really target all the smaller projects. Is that something that you'd like to address going forward?
Sure, thank you, Peter. That's a very good question. What I didn't talk about is more than half IFC's business is through financial institutions. So when we put out about $20 billion every year, of which 10 billion or so is for our own account as IFC, the balance coming from mobilization resources, half of that 10 billion, about 5 billion, is with financial institutions and funds. So we aim to reach the SMEs and others that we cannot work with directly ourselves through the investments in financial institutions, essentially. And that's where many of our many of the clients who want to work with us, but they're too small, we direct them to some of these banks and say, go talk to these banks because they are interested in funding green. And to that extent, we've also scaled up a lot of our training for some of these banks in funding green. So John talked about TCFD, for example. We are building capacity for banks in looking at climate risk and climate investment opportunities. For us, the risk is one part and the opportunity is the flip side, just in the TCFD framework. And we look to support banks around that.
Good. Another question for you, Anub, is where do you see the priorities for investment, or where's the most efficient way? If there are entrepreneurs listening to this presentation, where would you see the biggest opportunities?
So it depends
which
which
challenges, perhaps.
Right. So we think the climate business has significant opportunities. There's shift to renewables. So if you are in that space, anywhere in the supply chain of the renewables, different kinds of renewable energy, you have significant opportunities. The market is just growing so rapidly that there are opportunities in every corner of the world around renewables. Transportation, the systems are changing rapidly. We're no longer thinking of how many cars can we move on this road, but we think in terms of people to be moved. So what are the urban transit or last mile solutions that can come in to help address, and it's all that is being electrified. It's moving away from fossil fuels to electrification. Green buildings, for those of you in that space, retrofitting existing green buildings in Europe, it's as a significant opportunity, which much like when you had the example of the bulb, the incandescent bulb to the fluorescent lamps, you could see that by changing it, you could significantly reduce the electricity cost. most of these solutions pay for themselves. They are economically viable. They make this business case is very strong. So you could, green buildings are in, many people are in the construction business or in the real estate business. That's an immediate opportunity. And so these are some of the highlights, but I can think of many others in the early stage. For example, we've been investing in early stage technologies for climate smart agriculture. So if you have a company that whether it does drought resistant seeds or whether it has a forecasting model for weather where you can plant better at better times, or give the data to the farmers, there are apps the farmer uses in deciding when to plant. You're seeing a lot of that is leading to climate smart agriculture that is reducing environment footprint at the same time helping the environment in the way it operates, increasing yields. So yield per hectare of output. So I can keep going on different examples in different subsectors. In each area, you have a green opportunity that the world today is willing to fund. John talked about, the pension fund in Australia. Today, I can tell you the demand for green assets is more than the supply. There is money waiting on the sides that wants these green assets. The head of one of the, I think it was the government sovereign fund in a Nordic country said, we have a challenge in finding the number of assets that we want to put in money into in green bonds. So the financing side you will find available as long as the business case is solid, and there is a solid business case in many of the green businesses.
Maybe I could chip in, Petr, and just add something to what Anub is saying so eloquently, which is even if you're not operating in one of the sectors that sort of the immediate opportunities are apparent, there are efficiencies that you can win. I was speaking to the chief sustainability officer of a major Indian conglomerate the other day, who said that by sort of investing in the sort of energy efficiency innovations that Anna was talking about, like LED bulbs and so on, they achieve a return on capital employed in their group of 24% in their sustainability operations, which is the highest return on capital employed within that major industrial conglomerate. So, looking at some of the stuff that perhaps isn't hugely sexy, but can really affect your bottom line, will make your bank manager happy, I think.
And a good point. Now, I'm sure we have actually many bankers and bank managers listening in. So I'm sure we might have many contacts from the Central European and Czech banking industry, because I'm not aware that we too frequent contacts with the IFC or World Bank coming from Czech Republic or this area. Mainly, maybe we're more the EBRD focused, but anyway. John, one question for you, probably from British environment, that refers to a 10-point plan for green industrial evolution and how British government will support the recovery of the economy post-pandemia, especially with respect to green economy and green development.
Thanks. So what you're referring to with the 10-point plan was a plan set out by our Prime Minister in November last year, which will be developed through the course of this year and essentially forms part of the plan that the UK government has to deliver on our net zero target. But the 10 points that the Prime Minister highlighted on were points that will be not only good for delivering our net zero target, but also be good for leveling up the UK economy and bringing jobs and wealth creation to some of the poorer parts of the UK economy, and helping the UK economy grow faster as we recover from COVID-19. And the arc of my Prime Minister's language on climate change is really revealing. He's always been very supportive of the environment. It's a subject that's dear to his heart. But if you track his language on climate change, you see, for example, in 2013, he was on record as referring to offshore wind power as incapable of pulling the skin off a rice pudding, which is a popular dessert in the UK. And just 8 years later, he's giving a speech at the United Nations committing that by 2030, every household in the UK will be powered by offshore wind. And the reason we've seen that arc in his thinking is because over that period, the cost of offshore wind has fallen by over 45%. And so instead of being a very expensive form of generation, now offshore wind in the UK is outcompeting fossil fuels. And in the future, we anticipate rounds of offshore wind where the subsidy will be negative. Essentially, that the offshore wind operators will be paying the UK government for the privilege of supplying power to the grid. And so there's been that transformation, and it underpins his thinking that we can generate jobs by being at the forefront of the green economy to produce, for example, wind turbines, export them around the world. And also, and this is really important, particularly I think in a Czech context, that we can engineer through good policy a perhaps more orderly transition from a North Sea oil business that is focused on producing hydrocarbons and all the jobs and skills that are there in that hydrocarbon sector, and transition them and reorientate those jobs and those workforces so that they can be usefully employed in new sectors like the offshore wind industry. And that is a really important element, because it's no use simply having the economics in place. You can have the economics in place, but if you don't have the politics in place as well, then transition is really hard. And so one of the things that our Prime Minister is speaking about in that 10-point plan is setting up new clusters, for example, for carbon capture, utilization and storage, setting up new clusters for clean hydrogen in the northeast of the UK, so that you generate the political appetite amongst voters for this transition, as well as demonstrating the economic imperative.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've got space for last question. So this is again to John, but I think, Anub, this is also for you, because it regards the carbon emissions and disclosure and reporting, and perhaps wider ESG reporting. The question reads, you mentioned the UK companies will be required to disclose their carbon emissions in the future. Do you think that the supply chains are ready for credible reporting? I'm keen to see how UK companies will handle this, especially after seeing how Brexit supply chain issues have shown many gaps with transfer of information, etc. So I think basically, how do you see the future of carbon emission reporting disclosure, both from UK and world perspective?
Thank you, but that's one of those scary questions where the premise of the question betrays the fact that the person asking it knows a lot more about the subject than I do. So I hesitate to answer, but it's a good challenge. It's one of the reasons that we're staggering the introduction of TCFD disclosures into 2 phases, starting in 2023 with the major FTSE 100 listed firms, and then extending it in 2025 to the rest of the medium and large enterprises in the UK economy, to give everyone time to prepare. And undoubtedly there will be challenges and teething problems. But in this sense, it's better we've got to get this ball rolling, because there are many investment houses around the world. BlackRock, the world's largest private investment house, is committed to bringing its investment portfolio in line with Paris targets, and many of the high street banks and other investors are doing the same in the UK. So without the data coming forward from industries, it's going to be really hard for asset managers to allocate their investments accordingly. So we need to make a start, although I accept that there will be challenges, but it sounds like the person asking the question could probably help us address some of them.
Peter, if I can add this, on our side, I literally have a team of 4 people who helps the rest of IFC calculate GHG accounting for projects. So many times companies themselves have a hard time estimating the GHG footprint of their business, and so sometimes we have to look at that and help them. So yes, but it has moved from 10 years ago when I looked at it. It's no longer the difficulty that used to be, and now it's much easier to calculate and work out counterfactuals. So for example, when we look at technology and say this is the emission from this business, we can work out a counterfactual scenario as well as to what is happening in the industry. So I think there is enough capacity now in the market to measure GHG emissions. It goes beyond that now. Well, John talked about TCFD, and TCFD has 2 different components, and we're running some exercises on training, and more people are becoming familiar as applications have developed around it. But now it's no longer the rocket science, should I put it, as that it used to be, and it's more accessible to people to look and find the necessary expertise to help them in this area.
Excellent. I think we can conclude this session. Actually, for the people who are asking this question, in the second panel, we'll have an expert in ESG reporting from Ernst & Young, Alicia Mccoy. So we'll address this in bigger detail. I think it's extremely important point. And with that, thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Anub. We really appreciate that you made your time to be with us, and all the best. Enjoy France in your lockdown, Anub, and your safe travel to Kenya, John. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon and welcome back again. We'll be starting our second panel that is devoted to a discussion with participation of the academia and private sector. Apparently, it's not just the governments and multilateral organizations that can make the change, but it is the initiative of private sector and commercial entities that are most decisive for reaching the desired outcome. So we'll have in this panel, Mrs. Danuše Nerudová, who will be speaking about the post-COVID changes in the ethos of economics, i.e. about the shift from economic growth only to sustainable, perhaps a green growth, and a sustainable concept in the government. And it's a pity we haven't got anyone from the Czech government. We didn't have anyone on the first panel to see the reactions as to how and why Czech Republic should accelerate its endeavors to reach its sustainable development goals and make them even more aspirational, let me say. Second speaker will be Alicia Mccoy from Ernst & Young, speaking about the companies and customer approach to sustainability, how to measure, how to report, and some of the business cases that will be presented. And finally, Bob Bailey, who is the co-founder of Envoy, will be speaking about green growth initiatives and the SME perspective, because it's much easier for big companies such as British Petroleum or Royal Dutch Shell or Tesco or some of the big enterprises to do a bit of a green and sustainable development, but it's often more difficult for the SMEs to reach out and achieve some goals in this area. So Bob Bailey will be covering this. So with that, I would like to pass my words to Danuše, who is the economist and rector of the Mendes University in Brno, and she specializes in European taxation, quality of education, with emphasis on critical thinking and creative problem solving, which is very topical these days. She chairs the Committee for Pension Reforms, another very important task here, and she's actively involved in many public debates concerning economic, social, and environmental issues. According to Forbes magazine, Danuše is one of the top 100 most influential women in the Czech Republic. So, Danuše, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me speak about the sustainability and about the extraordinary time we all are living in, because for the economists, it's really extraordinary time, because we are living on the edge of changing the paradigm in economics. And as I was studying on the university, I never thought that it will happen to me, that I will be living in such a time. So for the economists, it's a really extraordinary time. And I think that we are trying to open up a public debate on this topic. And we are taking COVID as an opportunity to look back and to think about whether the economic model which our society is using since Second World War, whether this economic model is functioning or not. Because the COVID crisis is kind of an accelerator in the sense that the society is starting to ask the questions. And we are, as I already said, asking the question whether this economic model is functioning. We are asking the questions whether there shouldn't be a shift from pure economic growth to sustainable growth. And even though that we all witnessed increased welfare since Second World War, the access to medical care, we all also witness the environmental changes and to a certain extent also negative impact on security. Why I'm talking about the negative impact on security? Because this is the phenomenon which showed up in the spring last year when we had the beginning of the crisis here. And due to the functioning economic model, due to the fact that the businesses are searching cheap labor power, we have been missing critically things like face masks and all the other things, because we have just pushed the production of those things to the regions with cheap labor power as China or India. So the question is, shouldn't we move from this pure economic growth to sustainable growth? And of course, that the answer is yes, because this is what just COVID revealed, that the model is not efficient, that there are inefficiencies, especially in security, health security, environment security, and also food security and other securities. Therefore, we have started to think about a slight change in the general concept of sustainability. And you know that the general concept of sustainability is based on 3 pillars: social sustainability, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability. But we are talking about the fact that maybe the most important one, like an umbrella above all those 3 sustainabilities, is institutional sustainability. And this is something which is not done in every state. It's not done in the Czech Republic. What does it mean? That you have legal framework and you have government policies, how to implement sustainabilities in all the policies the government is doing. Therefore, we are talking about the fact that government needs to come up with sustainability policies in all those spheres. That's the only way how to reach an institutional sustainability. One more thing, what the economic model we have been using since Second World War also revealed is the fact that the necessary precondition also is intergenerational equity. And this is something which is not kept at the moment because our society is living on the expense of the future generations. And this is what needs to be also changed in the new economic model. Therefore, we are talking about the fact that companies, when maximizing the profit, should also take into account other aims, the aims which are defined by the society, for example, environmental aims or security aims. And as I already said, COVID crisis may be the opportunity how to come up with the green growth, how to get out from the crisis with green growth. And we have identified a couple of things which needs to be done in order to reach a green growth and in order to get out from the economic crisis the COVID has caused. The first thing is the change of way of our thinking. This is very much connected with the institutional sustainability, as I have mentioned. And I'm not only talking about stopping wasting of the national resources, but at least in the conditions of the Czech Republic, I'm also talking about stopping wasting talents. We are wasting of talents, and this is also very important to mention. The second thing is trust. Without a trust in society, without a trust in government, we are not able to get over the crisis and also from not only from the crisis, but by a green way. The essential part should be smart investments, green investments, for example, in agriculture, smart investments, precious agriculture, and things like this. Investments into the mitigation of negative effects causing exploitation of soil, for example. So smart green investments are another part. I already have been talking about the security, about energetic and health security, which is the essential part. I think that when we are talking about smart cities as a part of green growth strategy, we also need to talk about smart villages, because 30% of population is living in villages, not in the cities. So smart villages is the essential part of the green transition. Also, a very important part is the international cooperation, especially for the Czech Republic. We need to cooperate in the green transition in international platforms, and we need to take the opportunities which EU budget Generation Next how the Green Deal, in fact, can help the Czech Republic to transform the economics. And the last point, through the green investments, we need to transform the economics, and we need to move to the production with higher value added. This all can be done as part of a COVID challenge, as a part of transition in the economics, and as a part of way out from the economics crisis. Therefore, I do understand that the green growth is an essential part of getting out from the economic crisis. Not only Czech Republic, but European Union is currently facing.
Thank you very much, Danuše. And again, the Q&A session will be at the end on this panel. So if you could bear with us, I'm sure there'll be many questions to you. Our second speaker is Alicia Mccoy, a partner and cluster leader for climate change and sustainability services at EY, Ernst & Young, where she helps companies to understand the risks and opportunities arising from the climate change and sustainability issues. Alicia has been a frequent speaker for the topics on sustainability, ESG, strategy, and green growth. Alicia, over to you.
Thank you, Petr, and you actually reminded me of my UK days. I used to live in UK and they called me Alice there, so nice reminder. Thank you for that. It's great. Thank you for inviting me for this conference, and I like the flow of it. It's great to come from the international side of scene to what we can see in the Czech Republic actually. And in my short presentation, I would like to introduce to you sort of the trends that we see in EY, what we actually do in EY in sustainability, what are our ambitions. But mostly and most importantly, I want to talk about what we are already doing in the Czech market and what are the trends in the Czech market and the business cases from our country. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So I want to start with some numbers as well, actually, to set the scene. And we are carrying out a lot of surveys, global surveys every year, and I want to mention some of them. So the first one is around actually ESG reporting. And when I talk about ESG, it's really about environment, social, and governance of the entities, as Danuše mentioned before me. So I just want to highlight it's not just about environment, it's really important to think about the S and G as well, social meaning employees, communities that the companies are engaging with, and G is around governance. So what we see that the investors are really considering the ESG and the non-financial reporting in their decisions. As you can see here, what I'm highlighting that, for example, 72% of investors actually do review non-financial disclosures, which is up to from 32%, which we had in 2018. So you can see the increase is quite huge. There was a question around ESG reporting, and I'll touch upon it briefly later on as well. But there is a huge need for standardization actually around ESG reporting and certifications, because overall we have more than 400 sustainability standards and certifications in the world. So it's a staggering number, really, and obviously there are some of the ones that are main and widely known, like GRI or SASB. But we do see that, and we do hear it both from the investors and the companies themselves, that they really are looking for more standardization on how we report around ESG. It was mentioned before, and I'll highlight it, the whole sustainability movement, as we currently see it, is really a transformation. It really is a time for us to transform the economies. And huge amounts of money is actually now available through the EU funding, right? And there was some question around funding and how can companies in the Czech Republic specifically actually reach out to those funds. Some of them were already mentioned, but there are funds now like Modernizační fond, for example, which is focusing on renewable energy. and there will be others, and we are strongly supporting this and helping our clients in actually identifying the right ones that would work out for their project. And last one I want to mention here is the survey we've done around consumers. We always look at the future consumer trends. This is a global survey that we are doing. And year on year, we can actually see an increasing trend in how consumers are actually pursuing sustainability and the role it plays in their decision making. So in the last survey that we have done, we can actually see that 49% of consumers, they do favor and they do reflect protection of environment in their lifestyle. And quite a staggering number actually of those actually see it as the main criterion they're going to look at in 3 years, 26% out of those. 56% of the consumers say that they will be buying from companies who have positive impact on society, and they will do so even if the prices are higher. So I think that some of these numbers really do show us where the sustainability is heading, and that it's not just a trend now or mega trend, but it's here with us to stay. And I have to say that even on personal level, or what we see talking to our clients, that the pandemic has really accelerated this trend. It's really over the last year, the discussions we are having with companies and what we are hearing on the market, it's staggering to us, and which is really good. So if we can move on to the next slide. So as EY, we really see ourselves as leaders in sustainability. For us, it's a very, very important topic globally. So I wanted to highlight here, because this event is organized by British Chamber of Commerce. So I wanted to highlight some of our initiatives that actually we are leading from our UK practice, which is close to my heart as well. And we are very proud members of many international organizations like the World Economic Forum, UN Global Compact, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which obviously helps us to bring back the trends from these organizations and to inform the companies. And just recently, we've signed Terra Carta, which you might have heard about, which is actually an initiative of Prince Charles with 100 concrete steps how to tackle the climate challenge. So if we can move on to the next slide. And as we really believe in cooperation, what we are also doing, we together with, again, other companies. So we are building like a society, let's call it like a club. So we created a club of actually out of some of the large international companies, where we call it S30, where we want to really interact and bring new innovative ideas between the members. And the members are really through all the sectors. So we have pharmaceutical companies, their construction, production, manufacturing, you name it. And it's really a staggering number of companies that are in there. And actually, if you put together their market capitalization, they are larger than the Japanese economy at this point. And we do believe that through that connection and bringing together new ideas, that's how we can actually sort of support the sustainability initiative, because that's where the exchange happens. So if we can move on to the next slide. So just to prove that EY is really walking the talk, we are actually very proud about our carbon initiatives as well. So we became carbon neutral as a global company in 2020, and we have set ourselves some ambitious targets to become carbon negative in 2021 and net zero in 2025. I won't go through all the actions, but just to highlight some of the actions how we want to achieve this. So we are actually cutting down on our business travel, which now might seem a bit ironic at this time, and we can't travel. But as we were assured by our very optimistic US chairman, who said that he can already see a demand for the business travel ramping up in the US, where they are sort of more optimistic at this point, or already starting to move. So this already incorporates the fact that we will actually start flying again. So that's good news, but we will obviously change the way we work. On a more serious note, we are very much engaging in renewable energy. So our goal is to start using renewable energy more. We are already getting involved in some virtual power purchase agreements where you actually produce or introduce more renewable electricity than you consume into the national grids. And other areas like that. Also, we want to work with our suppliers on this. So that was one of the, I think, questions from the audience as well. And I think it's important part of the whole thing that you actually work with your suppliers on sustainability. So we will be asking 75% of our suppliers by spend, like so the largest ones, to actually set the science-based targets by no later than FY25. So from that, I think you can see the trends that are coming and what we are already doing. But most importantly, obviously, we are here to support our clients on the decarbonization journey. So that's where we really want to play our key role and share the experiences that we have globally. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So when we talk currently to the companies in the Czech Republic and abroad, like these really are the key things that we see that the sustainability sort of means to them and where it evolves. And here I would very much like to support what was mentioned by His Excellency or other speakers, that we really should look at sustainability as an opportunity for innovations and for how we run the business. And obviously, there is a lot of regulatory compliance and risk management coming with that. But really, companies should look at their current strategy and really assess how can they implement sustainability into that and change the way they operate. And other thing very important is the financing. So as I already highlighted in the beginning, there is a lot of opportunities on financing right now. And one thing that I want to mention as well, mentioned briefly, are, for example, the green bonds that are currently very popular, and already Czech companies are actually active in that and issuing green bonds as well. And EU subsidies, obviously, that's something that is coming. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Here I wanted to, before I move to the concrete case studies, very briefly, how we see and how we want to support our clients. We have three aspects. So one is value-led sustainability. And that's really about changing the discussion and changing it from the skeptical point of view and, oh, this is something we have to do, into how does it bring value to us? You know, how can we change the way we operate? How do we implement environmental, social aspects into our business model? And I'll talk about it on some concrete examples. The second point is around how to accelerate the transition, because even in the Czech Republic, we have quite a few companies who have, let's say, parent companies abroad, so they have some frameworks from their parent companies, but quite often they come to us to sort of support them with how can they act locally and also how they can act more quickly. And the purpose-led sustainability, that's something that I think me and Danuše can discuss later on as well. It's about how companies actually are disclosing the value that they are bringing to the society, because currently there are already quite a few models that can help you to measure the long-term value of your business, which is not just based on your P&L and balance sheet, but it's actually measuring the impacts that you are bringing to the society. So that's something that we are focusing on as well. So we move on to the next slide. So here I wanted to bring to light, and finishing with that, just looking at the clock, some concrete examples of what companies are already doing in the Czech Republic, or how we are supporting the local sustainability initiatives. So the first one that I have here is actually a brewery, a state-owned brewery, so it's a good sign. And here we were helping them actually with sustainability strategy. So we were helping them, and it was just phase one now with 2025 sustainability strategy. So our team actually helped them to benchmark and compare the current state to what companies abroad but even locally are already doing in sustainability. And then we held some design thinking workshops together with the management to sort of see how their aspirations are matching what others are doing, and obviously considering the risks and finances as well. And as such, we help them to prepare some smart goals around their water waste and packaging and CO2 emissions. Some pilot projects were identified, and now it's actually heading into a second phase where the client will start to implement this. Then we have a good example on decarbonization. So we have a very good energy team, and they actually helped one of the energy companies in the Czech Republic to come up with a model how to replace coal with biomass. So that's a very topical thing at the moment, obviously, and also financing was an important part of it. So we actually helped with the negotiations on funding with the European Investment Bank. So it's not just the European funds, but also sometimes you can reach out directly to European Investment Bank for funding on the projects. And the last one I have here is the non-financial reporting and assurance. So there we are helping a number of clients and actually preparing their first non-financial reports using all these standards that were mentioned before. So the Global Reporting Initiative for SASB and others. I mean, we're very happy to do that and to support companies on doing that. And we always say start with the strategy. Okay, this is the point where the non-financial report where you should get to after you have the strategy and you have the KPIs set. Then the non-financial reporting is either for some companies obligatory, but for some it actually is a nice way how to communicate what they already do around sustainability. And I want to finish because the topic of innovation and how to bring Czech Republic, to the front. We really want to be the front runners, and we have really nice examples and very innovative examples, even from our entrepreneurs community. As you might know, we organize the competition EY Entrepreneur, and as part of it, we do podcast with some of our winners. And the last one we done was with Libor Musil from Likos, actually. And Likos is doing some very interesting initiative. It's a project, actually. They call it Green Hall. So they came up with a very unique concept, and they have a patent with Mendel University, actually, on this, on how to make the halls, and we have so many logistics halls in the Czech Republic, how to make them green, and not just on the roofs, but also on the walls, and that's the more difficult part. And they have a very unique concept around it, how to use the water from that, etc., how to water the plants. And this has proven as a very effective way how to actually decrease the temperature, how to capture CO2, and it's also helping their employees with the well-being, which is obviously these days a very important topic as well. So very interesting interview on our website on that with Mr. Musil. I would recommend it to you who are interested in the topic, and great to listen to the spirit of Czech entrepreneurs and how we can actually start making a difference in a global scale, I would say here. So with that, I would finish and hand over to others. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Alicia. It's encouraging to see that the private market is taking the lead and to see some of the real life examples, because that's always the most exciting. Now, our last speaker is Robert Bailey, who's been involved in sustainable energy and environmental business for more than 40 years. And some of you may know that Robert is actually one of the founding fathers of the green and sustainable business in the Czech Republic, because he's been here for many years. But he is also doing business in other countries of Central Eastern Europe, Slovakia, Ukraine, Georgia. He's now based in Manchester and is working for the EU, EBRD, World Bank, and United Nations. And he'll be talking about the SME challenge for climate action or sustainable development. And also he'll present a project called Green Growth that is taking place in Northwest England. Bob, over to you.
Thank you, Petr, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to speak. As Petr has said, I'm going to talk about green growth and just give an example of how that can work for for smaller companies. So if you could put the next slide on, please. So as we've heard, sustainability is a positive thing to do, and we are increasingly seeing that governments and large businesses are also seeing the economic development potential, both at a city level and a national level, because increasingly it's being seen that going for green growth not only improves the environment, but it creates new businesses, or it creates lots of new jobs. And it's, as we've also heard, it's relatively easy for large companies to get involved in this agenda. In fact, most of them have been doing it for a number of years. They've got resources, usually internal specialists. They know how to access information and assistance, and they know how to access finance. If you're a small business, it's very much more difficult because you don't have those things. And if you're running a small business, as many people in the audience will know, you've got so many competing things for your time. You're trying to satisfy the customers, keep the production going, look after your cash flow, deal with staff issues all at the same time. So sustainability is not going to be something that is high up on your agenda. But at the same time, and increasingly, small businesses know that they need to get involved in this, because even if the cost saving angle is not sufficient, and in many cases we have to recognise that it's not. Increasingly, there's regulation that they've got, environmental regulation they've got to adhere to, and even more, there's supply chain pressure. So if they are supplying larger companies or governments or municipalities, they want to know what smaller companies are doing on the sustainability front. And so that's kind of getting smaller companies involved in sustainability. But the other side of this is that lots of small companies don't necessarily recognise the opportunity that there is for them. If it's a company that's doing, I don't know, LED lighting or something, solar panels or something like that, clearly it's their main business. But if you're in the engineering sector, you may be doing something that's not directly related to the green economy, and you don't necessarily see that there are opportunities there for you. So I just wanted, if we can have the next slide, please. I just wanted to talk about how this has been tackled for some time in Northwest England, where I'm sitting right now. Just in case you don't know what this region looks like, it's got some big cities, very big cities, Manchester and Liverpool in particular, many smaller cities and towns, mainly in the southern part of the region, and in the northern part, we've got a big tourist economy through the Lake District, but still the businesses that go with that. There are about 7 million people altogether in the region. The main industries are now engineering, chemicals, aerospace, textiles, and as I've already mentioned, tourism. But the history of the region is very much based on heavy industry, particularly in the south. It was on coal and steel and all the related industries. So it really occurs to me, and one of the reasons I've put those things there is that in many ways it is very similar sort of economy to the Czech Republic. Similar sort of skills base, similar types of industry base. So I think it's relevant to what we see in the Czech Republic. So the Green Growth Programme actually started 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it wasn't called Green Growth. That's been its name for about the last 5 years, I think. It started off as a resource efficiency program, helping companies to just improve their environmental impact. Over the years, it's had different funding sources, usually a mixture of EU funding and local or national UK funding. It's included large companies as well as small companies over the time as well. But it's got three main elements. As I've already mentioned, the first one is to help businesses to reduce their environmental impact and comply with legislation, etc. But alongside that, there's been really a lot of activity in growing what we call the low carbon goods and services supply chain. So getting companies into this green business and supplying local businesses. So what we found at the beginning is that a company might have a problem. It needs a new water treatment plant, say. So it would then start looking around. It might look elsewhere in the UK. It might go elsewhere in Europe to find the solution. And very often there would be a company just a few kilometres down the road who could actually supply that need, and they didn't know about it. So the third element has been very much about matching the needs of the companies with the local supply chain, and those two elements working very much together. If we look at the next slide, please. These are the achievements. These achievements are monitored very closely in the programme. It's necessary to attract further funding and necessary for some of the funders to see this. So over the time, there's been nearly 14,000 businesses that have been assisted. Most of those have been SMEs. There's been 8,300 new jobs created, and these are genuinely new jobs. It's reckoned that there are probably something more greater than 40,000 jobs in this sector, in this green sector in the region. So it's really very significant. It's comparable with the aerospace industry in the sector. And in financial terms, there's been more than 600 million euros of savings cumulatively over that time. And whilst an individual business maybe doesn't save all of that all that much on its own, when you start adding them together, the numbers start adding up. And I'm not going to go through all of those, but what's monitored in the programme is CO2 savings, water savings, materials savings, and the materials diverted from landfill. So it's been a very successful programme. It's mainly focused, although it started off as a regional programme because of political changes. We don't have a regional development agency anymore, so it's split into sub-regional programs now. So this particular one is now focused mainly around Greater Manchester, which is about 2.5 million people. So it's still a reasonably large program. And I think the key thing has been working together. So having the institutions that have been at the regional or a sub-regional level, having some resources to provide assistance to small businesses, and that assistance has been provided free of charge in almost all instances. There's been close links with the chambers of commerce. They've been involved in quite a few projects, certainly ones that I've been involved in. So it's just flagging up a way forward. And I was interested to see, just really in conclusion. Obviously, I'm happy to expand on this later if people would like me to. But I don't know if you know, but Bill Gates has very recently published a book called "How to Avoid a Climate Disaster: The Solutions We Have and the Breakthroughs We Need." It's very much, it's not just talking about policies. It's a very pragmatic sort of approach, as you perhaps should expect. And I was particularly attracted. I haven't read the whole book, but there was a very good extract in one of our national papers at the weekend. But just from of particular relevance to today, Bill Gates says, "Of course, big companies will have the largest impact in many of these areas, but small companies can also do a lot, especially if they work together through organizations like local chambers of commerce." So that's a good endorsement for one of our sponsors today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. That's excellent. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. And one of the questions I got from the audience, I need to rephrase it slightly so that it sounds more positive. So basically it says, it's unfortunate that we haven't got a representation of the Czech government, but luckily enough, the business is taking the lead in the climate action and green action projects. And I think this question would be to all of you, including Bob, because Bob has experience working here. Do you think we're doing enough here, or is the government and the state institutions doing enough to support the transition and the sustainable development action? Danuše, maybe you could start, closest to the public sphere.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think that the government is doing enough. I think one clearly visible thing is phasing out of coal, that we just had it for 2038, for the year when most probably we will run out of coal. Therefore, like setting up that limit is something which, well, okay, for me is not very, it's not showing that the government puts effort in these issues. Therefore, I think we could do more. One great opportunity for this is Generation Next, new EU budget, and looking into the document which has been elaborated by the Czech government. Well, what to say? We are going to invest into concrete instead of into green innovations and into people. So I think it might be, or it should be done much more than it is. We need to spend investments in effective way, not just wasting the money, especially in the time of a huge budget deficit. But honestly, I don't see this effort in Generation Next as well as in the Green Deal. I'm sorry, but I think that government could do much more for this.
Okay, Alicia, any comments on it?
Yeah, I would probably agree with what Danuše just said. I mean, feel we are missing the tone from the top, if I can put it like this. Like we are missing, you know, the messages from the government or from the prime minister and ministers around this. And it is a huge topic, but you don't really hear about it, read about it. And if you do, it's more on a negative note, let's put it this way, around EU and so on. So I think we really need to sort of enforce that message from the top, to show that Czech Republic is really involved, that we mean it, and to show both the positive examples, and also to educate more on this, to educate the businesses, to educate the society, and to have more active role in that. And even the financing part, which is super important and can help to bring out some of the good solutions. Also, you know, have more seminars on that, have more education around how can Czech companies actually apply for those. So, you know, we are doing our best as we can and trying to, you know, share the knowledge, etc. But this really needs to also come from like the government and the state itself, and in a much bigger level and more volume. Let's put it this way.
Okay, thank you. Bob, your experience, you have worked with the government here on green projects for decades. How do you see this?
I think it's the same probably as in the UK, that governments change, and sometimes there's been some quite good support for businesses, and sometimes not so good. But when that support has been there, it's been aimed at you know, reducing carbon emissions or whatever else on environmental improvements. I certainly haven't seen any signs that they've grasped the other side of the equation and the opportunity. And as the ambassador said right at the beginning, that, you know, the Czech Republic has got it's got the right kind of industry base, it's got the right talent to address this and really build a local supply chain. And I'm not convinced that the government has really seen that opportunity yet.
Okay, so let's hope our conference will help to take this up and bring more initiative on the government side. The more technical question here, and I don't, maybe mainly for Alicia, maybe Danuše, is regarding the ESG reporting. And you mentioned various bodies and standards that are used. And when we look back at sort of green finance, green bond standards, there's been a long talks about the taxonomy, probably too long talks, before the international community was able to establish what is actually green finance, green investment, green bond. How do you see the development in the ESG reporting? Will we witness similar process, or do you think it will be quicker?
Yeah, it's a topic very close to my heart. And when I start talking about it, I have to make sure that I don't use too many abbreviations. So I will try. But as I'm also involved in the financial reporting, I can compare and like let's see if we were trying to convert or converge the international financial reporting standards and the US GAAP standards, so the American standard. It took a very long time, but what we can see now on the non-financial reporting side, actually, that it's accelerating tremendously. So IFRS, which is the International Financial Reporting Standards Board, they set up a working committee, actually, and they will be coming up with a standard on a non-financial reporting. And they are working very closely with SEC, which is the American Exchange Commission on listed companies. And they are also actually right now accelerating this, and they will be again monitoring and collaborating with IFRS, and obviously EU as such is preparing a directive. And what's positive that you can see that all these bodies are now actually sort of communicating, and they are expressing the aim to converge and to come up with something that's going to be like a let's say global standards, or they will be very close to each other. And one important initiative here was actually World Economic Forum, together with other big forests. Actually, there was a study that EY participated in, and it's a project. It's called Stakeholders Capitalism. And it's actually for me a very good guidance for companies on how to approach the non-financial reporting, because it came out with 21 main KPIs across planet, so the environmental, social, and governance, but also it's starting with the purpose. So it's saying, like, for all the companies, first look at what's your purpose, why are you here, what are you adding to the society, and based on that, and develop your ESG strategy. And it's summing up 21 key KPIs, and it's one of the attempts on how to bring this on a global level to unified reporting on non-financials. Because currently there is a lot out there. As you know, there are a lot of rating agencies and a lot of basically sometimes different outcomes out of those rating agencies for different companies, and it's really sort of hard to put everyone on the same level and benchmark the companies one to another. But it's accelerating, so I'm optimistic here. Let's put it this way.
All right. Well, let's hope. The green taxonomy takes probably too long, more than it should. Now, Danuše, your perspective, and also perhaps add sort of the Czech element, how to make sure that we don't take it with this typical Czech skepticism and do it more in the sort of value-led example that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the specialist on IFRS, but I'm really happy to hear that there is a working committee on the thing. And I think a next step for the Czech Republic is to transform the standard into the national gaps, because without national gaps, nobody will report it. But I have to say that, for example, for universities, the time is also changing. On top of the international rankings, now we have rankings how the university is green, and this is forcing us for non-financial reporting, because we need to report for these rankings. So I think that the times are changing, but I'm not aware of the fact whether this is something which will be also asked from the public bodies, from the government. I think they are somehow out from this reporting, and they are also the ones who should report and should be forced for sustainability, and should be forced to the green things. So maybe this is also the way how to force the government to start to think about those issues.
Yeah, I would just comment on that, Danuše. So actually, I'm working closely with Asociace společenské odpovědnosti, and they have this non-financial reporting as an initiative as part of their SDG prices. So it's been just announced that there is a new round now where companies can apply. And last year, actually, we had the Česká zemědělská univerzita there. So they do have a non-financial reporting, which is a very nice examples of public bodies taking it voluntarily at this point.
Yeah, but I have to say that the Czech University of Life Sciences and my mental university are two universities really the only one dealing with the environment. Therefore, it's quite, let's say, our good PR in public that we voluntarily do this thing. But I'm not aware of any other university which would step in, because it's voluntary.
I see. Well, we need to take the lead on that. Apparently, there's still a bit of lag and way to go. Now, I think we need to finish the panel here. And thank you very much all. Thank you, Danuše, Alice, and Bob. And very interesting discussion. Of course, you're welcome to join the next panels. And I will turn over to British Chamber team, Sylvia and Pavel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon. Hello, everybody, once again. Petr, thank you very much for facilitating these sessions. Your input is very much appreciated. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for those who have booked one-to-one meetings, please do not go away and stay with us, and as you will be automatically connected with your business counterpart. Meetings will last approximately 8 minutes. And if you have not booked your meetings, you have now 10 minutes break. You can go back to the main lobby and see the partners' presentations by clicking on their logos. At approximately 3:25 p.m., please click at the parallel panels button and choose the panel you would like to join in. And I will see you with the rest of the team of BCC at the panel you have chosen. So far, thank you so much for your attention.